And then Holly and Britton are going to walk around and give you all just the tiniest little splash. You can feel free to spit if you don't get it on your neighbor, or you can swallow. Sugar in it. It started with roughly 25% sugar, so it's mostly fermented, and it means it's got about 10% alcohol. So if anybody's here or fans of German Riesling, this has about the, doesn't smell anything like a Riesling, but the basic structure of texture of this wine at this point is much like a semi-dry Riesling. My main job this time of year is on a daily basis to monitor these fermentations, because this is the most active part of the wine's life, and it could go off the rails on any day, from one day to the next. So one of my primary responsibilities this time of year is to taste every one of these tanks, and for me, this is really simple at this point. I know there wasn't a problem yesterday, and there's nothing going wrong today, and already I get reports from the lab about how much progress it's made in terms of its fermentation. They do a daily analysis of the sugar decline in the sugar level. So to me, this one's real simple. It's just like, yeah, done, good, no problem. Okay. One of the things that over time I've really developed is a feel for what the fruit and the vines are saying to me. And that is the irrevocable decision, is the picking decision. So it's the most important decision, especially with reds in the wine's life. Whites are a little bit more forgiving, because the white wines are much more about the technique and the recipe, where red wines are all about, if I grow a better Pinot Noir grape, I make better Pinot Noir, period, the end. Because the recipe is, the winemaking is very straightforward with reds. You just extract what you can from it, and then you age it. Whites, you more create the flavor. Okay, we're just gonna move to another tank. We'll keep, yes. Okay, now we're going to taste a wine. This is a Grenache Blanc. This is from the estate. This is just beginning its fermentation. So this is the opposite of what we just tasted, which was at the end of its fermentation. And so this mainly is juice. So this is maybe about 2 or 3% alcohol at this point, and it's about 22% sugar. One of the things that's really unique about wine grapes is they get to almost double the sugar of any other fruit. Okay, so a table grape, maybe 15% sugar. A really ripe apple, 12%. You know, a wine grape fully ripe, 27%. So that is one of the key things. And you'll see, this almost tastes like fruit nectar at this point. It's very, very sweet. But the fermentation has begun. You'll see, you know, the clearest indication of fermentation is the production of CO2. That's the indicator. So it's fizzy. Everything we're going to taste today is, that's going to be its unifying theme, carbonate.
What's in the jacket?
This is a food grade alcohol and water. Yeah. The alcohol is mixed in there because certain times of year we want it colder than freezing. This time of year we run the jackets. I think the lowest we can take a tank this time of year is about 45 degrees or something like that. There's no need to take them cold. Again, this is mainly at a juice phase. This point in the fermentation, when it's just taking off, is a point where the yeast can stress really easily. So I'm actually, at this point, paying more attention to this tank than I was on the other one. The other one is it the same as yesterday? This, because it's just beginning fermentation, if there's going to be any stress on the yeast, if the yeast are not getting some kind of micronutrient they need, they'll tell me, because there'll be off smells. So I'm much more focused on what's going on with this wine right now. There's in an average wine's life, without anything going wrong, there's probably at least 200 decisions. So you're constantly making decisions. And during fermentation, what can go wrong is a couple of things. But the most common is if the nutritional profile of the juice is not exactly right, the yeast will go into stress and start producing unpleasant sulfurous aromas. So this, instead of smelling like fruit juice, will smell like rotten eggs. In which case, I know that I've got to get those yeast healthier and happier. And so I can add vitamins, I can add minerals, I can add nitrogen as the main nutrition source for yeast. So if I think it's a simple, we analyze for the simple nutrients. So if I get that signal from a wine at this stage, I know it's probably a micronutritional aspect, probably a vitamin that is missing. The wine industry, like all agriculture, is very tightly regulated. California in particular has the most stringent agricultural and food control laws of anywhere on the planet. More stringent than Germany, which is second. So the chance of you getting any contamination in California produced wine or produce is a theoretical 0.
All right.
Yeah, stuff that you can put on your lawn at home, I would be thrown in prison if I used. So, high copper levels, and the yeast just eat them up. So the processing of wine, especially the fermentation of the yeast, is a kind of a natural sanitizing, if you will. Wine is far purer than the water you drink in terms of anything extraneous, I guess I would say.
Where does the yeast come from?
I buy most of my yeast from a company called Lafort. It's a French company, but there's a number of companies that make yeast, and they spend enormous resources selecting yeast. They all come from fermentations. The only place that wine yeast exists are in fermentations, but they'll identify, and they have unbelievable analytical tools these days for identifying better yeast than the others. Then they propagate them up. I get them in a dry active form. If anybody bakes bread here, you know that kind of dry active yeast. I have the same thing, though I buy it in 10-kilo packages, and it's not selected for its ability with bread, but rather its ability to, and I use very different yeasts. I probably use 10 or 15 different yeasts in the course of a year. This particular tank is going on a yeast called Opal, is the name of it. It's got a proprietary name, they all do. Some of them are just numbers, like they're the ID number for the little tube they were selected in. This one was specifically selected to do well in a stainless environment with wines that are meant to be fresh. I know where this wine is going, when I'm going to bottle it, and what I want from it. And this yeast has been specifically selected to enhance those characters. On the other hand, like my barrel fermented Chardonnay, which we're not going to taste today, there's literally hundreds of wines in here, and we have a limited amount of time. But the barrel fermented Chardonnay, I use a yeast called Montrachet that was selected a long, long time ago. One of the very first selected strains. I think the Pasteur Institute in France selected it. And it's very primitive and would do a terrible job in this situation, but does a great job with barrel fermented Chardonnay, where you want a very strong yeast fingerprint. Here I want a strong fruit fingerprint, a very fruit-driven wine. Barrel fermented Chardonnay, I want a real yeasty, complex, broad, and slightly stinky wine, literally. It's what the French called minerality, but it's a kind of a pleasant, sulfurous note. Then I have entirely different suites of yeast that are used for reds. Some yeast will help enhance color and tannin and grip. Others will, if you've got a very strong wine like a Petit Syrah, will calm it down. So it's very much specific to the wine. The open tops, we push them down. But actually, that pump right there, you pump it out of here and up over the top and push the wine through the solids. Yeah, the seeds tend to clog up these caps. This is actually behaving pretty well. These can take you sometimes minutes to just get a glass full.
When it's fermenting, does it actually heat up?
Yes, the yeast produces a good bit of heat. And if you don't have these jackets to control the temperature, it can get out of control, and then it'll kill the yeast, and then you're really in trouble. We have a lot of little porta tanks and stuff too, and the kind of question is, what's a tank? Does that include the porta tanks, Brett? Yes. All right. I was going to say, it seemed kind of like a high number. It's typical red wine color. So this is just the phase that the wine's in for the early part of fermentation. Here to have a source for our Cabernet, but they have some other stuff that goes there too. So. And it's a Pinot Noir. And we were losing $20 a case on it, so that was not sustainable long term. And so we abandoned that idea and started making Cabernet, because we knew we could get Paso Robles Cabernet at a price that we could at least make some money on the by the glass price point. So that was just strictly a financial decision. We didn't have any overwhelming desire to make Cabernet, but we needed as part of our portfolio for the market a red wine that could get to a price that restaurants could pour it by the glass. And the other stuff is just purely serendipitous. We've been making a dessert wine from Viognier by the freezer method. It's like ice wine, but you freeze it in a commercial freezer. And it very successfully A lot of fun, really good outcome, good quality wine. This year we lost that commercial freezer. Somebody bought it and they filled it with all their own stuff and they're not leasing space in it anymore. So at the last minute, we lost our technique for making dessert wine and we're about to run out, and I made a white port from VDA. So I never thought I would want to make a white port, but I wanted to make a dessert wine, and that was the only dessert wine available this year. So more often than not, it's expediency. And sometimes it's just curiosity or desire by some person in the organization. I'll give you an example that didn't work this year, but maybe we'll do it next year. You know, we grow apples in this area too, out in Sea Canyon. There's some really good apple spots, and I love cider, alcoholic cider. And so I thought, we have all these tanks, apples come in after grapes, let's make some cider. And everybody was really gung-ho about it, and so all of a sudden the sales team started thinking, oh, we're gonna have to sell this stuff. And everybody panicked at the last minute and shut the project down. But I'll be gonna lobby for it again next year. So that's just on my own personal behalf. I like drinking cider. I've made it at home. I want to try it at full scale. Because you can make a better product at larger scale than you can make at home. It's just more, better equipment.